Actually, Neal, was that? Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm Duncan Sparrow, a member of the Borderless Cyber Program Committee. I'd like to thank the Council of ISACs and OASIS for co-hosting Borderless Cyber. And I'd like to thank Cyware, Capato, and RE Security for sponsoring Borderless Cyber. It's my honor and pleasure to introduce Neal Ziring, Technical Director of NSA Cyber. I've known Neal for a number of years now, and we share a passion for cybersecurity automation, as well as we are both alumni of AT&T Bell Labs. Neal will be speaking on future challenges and directions for security automation and orchestration. Neal, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Duncan, and thank you to all the program committee for inviting me to speak at Borderless. I think I haven't spoken at a Borderless event in probably about 4 or maybe 5 years, so it's good to be back. Let me see if I can show my slides here. This worked earlier. Share, and yeah, there we go. So I'm going to speak with everybody today about what I view as emerging or upcoming challenges as we try to advance security automation orchestration, and in particular, given the theme of Borderless this year, how we can apply or how we might need to extend security automation orchestration to apply to helping us with supply chain security, and particularly software supply chain security. Okay, my own background, I've been with NSA for almost 32 years now, pretty much that entire time working in cybersecurity, or we used to call it information assurance and InfoSec. And as Duncan said, I'm very interested in security automation. I was one of the earliest participants, for example, in the NIST Security Content Automation Protocol program, and then also collaborated a bit with Duncan on OpenC2. So I think it's a very important topic. Now, security automation orchestration and response, SOAR, was recognized as its own technology area for security around 2015, although development had been proceeding for at least 2 and possibly 3 years before that. And SOAR has provided substantial benefits to all of us, to companies, to governments, to academic institutions. It's given us ability to respond more quickly and consistently. It's given us greater visibility. It's given us ability to orchestrate sequences of actions and reduce manual intervention. And it's also provided an avenue for enterprises and analysts and government to share knowledge about attacks and responses in the form of playbooks and courses of action and indicators of compromise and so forth. But we're still experiencing cyber attacks, right? Ransomware is a huge problem these days. Supply chain attacks are a growing problem. So what can we do to help that? And my belief, and I think many of you probably share this, is that security automation has not yet given us all the benefits that it can, that there's headroom there to get a heck of a lot more security benefit out of security automation technologies and standards. And of course, OASIS being a group that is extremely active in that standards area. So let's think about the supply chain for a moment, as shown in this exceptionally lame diagram that I drew a couple weeks ago. Think about supply chain for software, right? We need to have the developers, they need to protect their repositories, their build environments. Then you have integrators, right? Nothing is developed from scratch anymore. So you have to protect their development, their integration and test environments, their distribution and support facilities, and respond to any supply chain compromises they might learn about. And lastly, the sort of consumers, the end users of the software, individuals, enterprises, have to think about protecting their own distribution and update facilities, and protecting the integrity of their link to their developers, integrators, and respond to any supply chain compromises. So in talking about security automation and how it can help supply chain, I'm going to try to hit a few areas, okay? And it's my belief that as powerful as security automation tools and standards are today, that to use them really effectively to protect supply chains, we're going to need some new features, new forms of interoperability, new environments that they can operate in. So we're going to talk about how SOAR can get better in improving defensive visibility and responsiveness across more environments, about how it can get better at describing conditions of compromise, defensive and response operations at higher conceptual levels where our adversaries are attacking us. And that's particularly important for supply chain. And then ways in which security automation can get better at facilitating community, collective, cooperative action, right? Not just action by one enterprise, but action by many enterprises operating in concert to defeat adversary activity. Okay. And I'm pushing ahead fairly quickly because I want to make sure to leave time for Q&A. So be thinking of good questions. Okay, so the first area we're going to talk about is higher level expression. A lot of security automation standards and tools that exist today, quite frankly, describe things at a fairly down in the weeds kind of level, a fairly deep technical level. And I believe that automation can become more powerful by also enabling expression at higher levels of abstraction and higher sort of semantic levels that map directly to the sorts of conditions we're trying to prevent, okay, types of compromise, right? So we have current tools and standards. STIX is very widely adopted, OpenC2 getting good adoption, OpenIOC has been around for a while, and others, and Cacao is coming along. They express details of attack indicators and defensive responses really well. But I think that in order to facilitate using security automation to defend our supply chains, to defend our enterprise mission operations, we have to have a greater ability, that's a typo, it should say greater, to express actions, maybe I can change it. Okay, there, it's fixed. To express actions at higher levels, use interoperable abstractions that will allow us to convey information around the community at these high levels. For example, if we want to express threats or compromises of supply chains, we need abstract ways to describe things like sourcing and provenance and distribution channels, okay, that could allow us to make statements about if this change happens to the provenance of this software, then the response action is to alter this distribution channel. Toolbar came out of nowhere. Okay. We have to be able to describe not just individual attacker actions, but more about their campaigns and their infrastructure and perhaps even their objectives in more abstract terms. So rather than referring to a piece of attacker infrastructure solely by an IP address or a domain name, we might refer to it by its behavior. And that's been a substantial focus for us at NSA, is being able to understand more about attacker behavior and then using that to communicate to defenders. Okay. Of course, we need to be able to reference elements from standard taxonomies such as MITRE ATT&CK, and for response actions, MITRE just, I think it was just yesterday or the day before, released DEFEND, which is a taxonomy of defensive measures. And then for response actions, we have to be able to describe them abstractly so that the action we wish to perform can be executed in different environments. And I think Cacao, which is an emerging standard, will be a big help with this in particular. So that was area one. Okay, area two, broader automation support. This one's pretty straightforward, really. The automation standards that we have today, STIX, OpenC2, et cetera, are very powerful at describing certain environments. I would say, in my view, they're strongest in describing a typical enterprise IT environment because that's where they originated. But I think they need to be more broadly supported, and they need to be able to operate in more environments. So high-level web applications, we need them to be able to describe aspects of our development environments like code and document repositories and software inventory and update and distribution systems, and sort of a whole separate topic, operational technology and industrial controls. And part of this really is about continuing to advance these technologies in the vendor communities. Like, it's great that a security product that I install in my network can generate a STIX message or accept an OpenC2 command, but those aren't the whole of my environment. Can my software build chain detect attacks or be controlled over OpenC2? And the answer for today is no, that it would require a proxy or adapter at the very least to allow me to express an action against my Git repository that I want to take in order to counter an attack. Same is true of software update systems. So I think if we can get this support into a broader range of products, especially those products that support our supply chains, then we'll be in better shape for automating response to attacks against those supply chains. Okay, next. Many of you probably are involved in efforts at companies, government agencies, and elsewhere to move parts of our computing infrastructure into cloud environments, right? And if anything, I think, at least at some government agencies I'm familiar with, cloud migration or cloud adoption has been accelerating for a wide variety of reasons. Now, modern cloud environments are very complex, right? They offer a huge range of compute and storage and platform as a service and software as a service and all sorts of glue for putting those things together. And they have very rich monitoring and security controls that are available to the users of those cloud environments. Unfortunately, the downside of that is, at least in my experience, every cloud provider does it differently, right? They all have an identity management layer, but they're all different, okay? And so enterprises, right, are adopting use of more cloud services, including portions of the supply chain, like software development, integration, and delivery. But there's a sleeper issue that I wanted to raise, sort of having to do with cloud, and that's cloud marketplaces. When you're in a modern cloud environment, you aren't just using services, or you don't have available to you only those services offered by the cloud provider. You have all sorts of third-party providers that will sell you services that run within that cloud. That's a new type of supply channel, and I believe it presents a new potential exposure for supply chain attacks. Now, pretty much everything in a modern cloud can be controlled via APIs, and of course, those APIs are also different from provider to provider. So where you find the commonality is a bit higher, right? There's concepts of identity and privilege and control and activate this asset and disable that asset. Those concepts are shared in common across all cloud providers that I'm aware of. But the actual APIs to invoke those things, of course, are all different. So the key here is that we need to be able to perform automated security detection and response and orchestration in these cloud environments, right? So that if, and we saw that in SolarWinds, that the attackers managed to get a foothold in their target enterprises, but then extended their attack over to, in some cases, the cloud assets of those victims, right? So if we're going to automate the defense of our enterprises and the defense of our supply chains, then we need abilities to extend security, orchestration, or automation into these cloud environments and control the assets at the semantic level that's appropriate to operating in a cloud native or cloud hybrid environment. Okay, next. And this one is in some ways the most complex of my 4 areas. So I'm going to spend just a smidge more time here. Area 4 is enabling multi-party or multilateral orchestration. The issue with supply chains attacks, as we've recently seen, and other attacks too, but I'm going to concentrate on supply chain for a moment, is that a campaign by a malicious actor can extend across many victims, right? And we've seen that. For example, a few weeks ago, there was a service supply chain compromise in the airline industry, where a company that provided service to many, many airlines was compromised, and those impacts extended to like dozens of airlines. So what I'm trying to say on this slide is that the next step in community defense is going beyond information sharing, which we're doing much better at today, and organizations like ISACs are very powerful in that regard, but getting to actual multi-party coordinated orchestrated response, so that we can actually, if an adversary is executing a campaign, for example, against a bunch of companies in a particular market sector, that those companies can coordinate their response actions to not only eliminate the adversary or the malicious actor from one of their number, but like kind of hit them all. And if we think about supply chain attacks, we may need to take coordinated action across different points in the supply chain, right? An initial developer, an integrator, a distributor, end user, in order to effectively eradicate that particular supply chain threat, or perhaps even to detect it in the first place. Now, when I was going through preparing this talk, I had a great deal of fun trying to think of all the different ways that multi-party orchestration could be implemented, and there are many. Right? You can kind of have coalition of the willing, a bunch of peers. You could have hub and spoke, which I expect you might see in, for example, the Department of Defense. You could have sequential, where there are entities in the multi-party orchestration that need to take activities in a certain order, and there are a bunch of other models as well. So we need our current standards and the standards that are coming down the pike eventually to have features for distributed orchestration. And some of those features might include things like external triggers, and that to some extent I think is supported today. Some notion that when this external condition occurs, I'm going to take an internal response. A notion of a constrained response, right? If it's something I'm doing in concert with my coalition members, then there are certain parts of my infrastructure that I won't touch when I do that. We need integrity and authenticity guarantees. I'm getting a tip off from a partner. Well, is it really my partner that I trust, or is it some malicious actor trying to get me to take an action? And so, and there may be other features, right? I think we have only begun to scratch the surface of this particular area, but I think it could be very important. Okay, there were a few other areas that I thought about, but I kind of couldn't come up with enough specifics or details to kind of make a full slide about each of them. But I thought, since I have this audience here at Borderless, I have an opportunity to put a bug in your ear that these may be areas that we need to consider in advancing security automation and its application to new areas, including supply chain. So the first one is measures of effectiveness, right? it could also be, in some cases, measures of confidence. I'm going to take this response action. How well did it work? And based on how well it worked, I might take some further action. I observed something. What's my confidence that I'm observing that accurately? And how do I incorporate that into the response actions that I might take? Okay. Second one is leveraging AI. There's been a tremendous growth and advancement in AI and machine learning. And how do we incorporate those things into our security operations and into our security automation? And people have talked about this a lot in one particular context, which is, could you allow an AI to be pulling the levers on your automation system rather than a human operator? And that's certainly a valid question. You sometimes hear it called the autonomy question. But I'm thinking about something a bit deeper. If you have an AI that is detecting anomalies or that you're asking to coordinate a sequence of actions, how does that change security orchestration? And do we need to reflect that in our practices and in our standards? And lastly, a really open issue, but one that there's been a substantial published literature on, is incorporating deception. Can we utilize deception to misdirect or mislead or deter adversaries, malicious actors that are attacking our networks? And I think this is an area that will probably grow in the coming years. We already do simple things like honeypots, and that is technically a form of deception. But could you incorporate a deceptive action into an orchestrated response? And how will you know if it worked? And what do you do if it doesn't work? I think are all open questions for how we utilize security automation and how we advance it to sort of improve the protection of our enterprises and our networks. Okay, so I think that might be, here's the last slide. Okay, so to wrap up, I've tried to go pretty quickly to protect time for Q&A, but to conclude, I believe that automation and orchestration are very effective. They're protecting our enterprises today. The tools, technologies, standards, practices involved are advancing steadily. Right? We have folks working at OASIS who are directly working to advance them, right? But we can do more. I believe that orchestration automation technologies can help us to protect our individual portions of global supply chains. Oh, sorry. Sorry. What the hell? Sorry about that. It was just warning me I should be done by now. It can help us respond to supply chain compromises, and especially respond in a multilateral fashion. And that's really, as I see it, the biggest potential benefit going forward is utilizing these technologies to help defenders cooperate and respond collectively. Attackers, once they develop a type of tradecraft, they enjoy the benefit of using that over and over again, right? And that's something we want to take away from them and utilize automation to help take that away from them so that they get to use their tradecraft once and then it doesn't work after that because the whole community is ready to respond effectively. So in this talk, I've proposed 4 areas that I think are important for future work in SOAR technologies and tools and practices and standards. I welcome your comments on whether those areas are valid, or maybe I missed a critical one that you think is important. And that concludes my talk, and I'm ready to take questions if anybody has any.
Well, thank you, Neal. That was excellent. I learned a lot. I always do when I hear you speak. Some great stuff in there. I actually wrote down a whole bunch of questions of my own, but I will remind the audience that they can ask questions, put them in the chat, and I will moderate the questions and pass them on to Neal as we have time. Your first area of automation, you mentioned the higher level of abstraction. Something that's actually been on my mind for a number of years now is the whole concept of security policy. So part of the higher level abstraction is telling it what you sort of want it to do at that higher level. Do you know of any work in that area of trying to not even standardize, but just a way to express the policies in a common way? Even among humans, it's hard.
Yeah, so I'm a little rusty on that stuff, actually, Duncan. I remember studying a few proposals several years back and going to a couple of talks, might have been at an RSA conference, of people proposing, I guess you'd say, compact languages. Of course, they were all in XML back in those days, to be able to express the policy. And even one talk I went to about sort of taking human written documents and trying to turn them into this formal description. The only one of those efforts I know that sort of gained a lot of traction was XACML, which is a language for describing access control policy. But I think that's a really important area, because often the notion of a compromise can be detected because a policy is violated.
Yeah.
And if we had a way to express policies formally and then to detect deviations from that, I think it could be quite valuable.
Yeah, I agree. I would say that XACML and OpenC2 and Sticks, as you mentioned, are parts of Sticks are higher level, but an awful lot of it is, I'll call it, they're maybe not assembly language. We're maybe up to the C-level language yet, but we're certainly not up to the higher functional program languages. And I think even like XACML, I think is more, at the C level than really at the higher policy level that the business guys would understand that we're trying to actually translate their real world. And so that, I agree, that's a really big area there. You mentioned the coordinated, let's see other, oh wait, I do see questions in the chat. Let me,
okay.
One of the questions is, do you happen to know if the NSA has been utilizing any of the extension mechanism of Sticks 2.1? Again, down in
that's
assembly
a
language
good question.
What's the question?
Yeah, so I don't think we're using it yet. We certainly have some use of Sticks, but all of the uses and we want to increase it, but all the uses I'm aware of are sort of straight up like Sticks 2.0.
Yeah.
There may be work that I'm unaware of, or that recent developments, but we very much want to be using sort of the latest features of Sticks and be up with the community and use Sticks and the extensions to be able to communicate our guidance and our tips and so forth in more of a machine readable way. So a good question there by the questioner. I'm sorry, I don't have more details to give you.
Another question asks, there's a challenge getting vendors to adopt standards, and sort of the multi-party cooperative SOAR seems like it require even more cooperation and everybody doing the same thing than even our current world. Any thoughts or strategies on how to encourage vendors to embrace it, other than we have the tech director of cyber telling you go do it? So even just you saying that is going to make a certain amount of adoption. But do you see it getting into acquisition policies and the power of the purse that was used in the executive order? Do you see that occurring here too?
Yes, definitely. And we actually saw that quite a bit with NIST SCAP. It got into acquisition policy, and that made a difference. I think we have to do it that way. And of course, government has to play a role. I've been sort of within government trying to encourage folks, hey, we should make this a condition of acquiring some of this technology, that it obey these standards. The standards are absolutely critical for interoperability. There's no way within government or even most large enterprises that we can get everybody to buy the same vendor of a certain type of product. firewalls, routers, host security, and there's always going to be a variety, and the standards make the interoperability possible. The other aspect, in addition to sort of acquisition policy or standard, what we would call standard functional requirements or KPPs, would be to also disseminate or broadcast successes, right? If your enterprise was able to meet an attack and automation helped you eradicate that attacker faster, then I think it's very important to trumpet those success stories, because then the vendors will want to say, hey, I can enable that, right? My product does that.
Right.
Yeah, those are sort of the two that I can think of off the top of my head.
Well, thank you. Well, we are out of time, but I will give you 1 minute for any final thoughts, any closing thoughts you want to leave us, what people should take away from this.
Okay, thanks, Duncan. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak and sort of disseminate some of these ideas today. I would say to the audience, keep up the fight. We're making progress in a lot of these areas, including security automation. And I'm working on supply chain related security right now. In fact, I went to a meeting about it just earlier today. If we come together as a community, we can improve the standards, improve the practices, drive improvements to the tooling to make these attackers' lives much more difficult. So please participate.
Thank you very much, Neal. This was excellent. I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to talk with us. And thank you, everyone, for attending. We'll now take a 10-minute break and then move on to the next talk. So thank you.